You may have heard these words before, but I'll teach you what they really mean. Go beyond! Plus!
Oh, welcome to Sealy Wales. Look at that, man. Back in a row. We're building consistency once again. This is a mental health podcast. We talk about things that are a little bit on the touchy side, especially this episode. Not gonna lie, this episode's heavy. Pretty fucking heavy. Don't even, it's an episode you gotta skip due to not wanting to hear about things like suicide and anxiety and all that stuff. This is probably the episode you should probably watch My Hero Academia, because I'm watching that anime at the moment. Do that if you don't want to hear about suicide, because that's literally what we're going to be talking about in the first mental health this week. So, yeah. But with that all being said, this podcast is for everyone, but it might not be for you. As I mentioned, Joe's here. Joe's alive. Hi, Joe.
Hello.
Mental health this week. It's going to be a tough one. So before I do the transition into it, I am going to give you like a second or so to decide whether you want to hear about a teenager committing suicide due to exam stress. So this is your moment. I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Cool. It's time for mental health this week.
You failed.
Yeah. So, mental health this week, we discuss news of mental health in the week. This is the tough one. This is a very tough one for both of us, really. Exam stress is a horrific thing that young people go through. And it is always worrisome and, quite frankly, alarming when a young person takes their own life due to exam stress. And we now take you to an article by The Sun, but I've also read it in slightly more detail, but paywalled by The Times, about Alex Henshaw, 17 years old, who sadly committed suicide after his exam paper for GCSE Maths originally had a fail on it, and it was remarked the next day after his passing, and he actually passed. Now, the reason why this story is really, really important to highlight is because exam stress is a killer, but it also highlights 2 things. Alex had ADHD and autism, and he was studying a BTEC in game design at Basingstoke College of Technology. And he was doing so well on his course, by the way, he was accused of cheating. And it's very harrowing it's always harrowing when a mother has to bury her child. But what's equally harrowing is that his mom has been asking for more support as well in terms of his special educational needs. And the messaging around all of this has been more support is needed, and the mum isn't to blame at all. There's nothing that we can look at and go, this could have been done better at home. No, this is a case of the education system once again suffocating the joy out of someone's life. Literally. Anyway, that's me.
In the whole of this, I'm immediately like, okay, what was it about my experience personally that when it came to like exam stuff that stopped me from, what's the best way of saying this? What stopped me from going as far over the edge when I started failing, for example, at a certain point? Because I'm just trying to think how bad this is and trying to give an example from my own perspective of like, okay, this is a horrible thing that's happened. And I think the only reason that stopped me, because this is what kind of gets to me at some level, I think one of the only reasons that stopped me was that I had a very particular like perception of reality around this point that said like, oh, I'm like, I would be able to continue on to an education regardless of how well I did at a certain level. So to give the idea, what I mean is that I had like a unconditional thing. But I remember, but there's been many times in my life where exam deliverance and exam stress was one of the most problematic moments in my life. Not only at that point, but possibly ever. Like in sort of retrospect, like the feeling of it then and then the feeling of it going forward. I can't really, I can't feel good. Obviously, we can't. No one can feel good about this. But I can't believe, to a certain extent, that we live in a system that puts so much emphasis. And this is like, to be clear, I guess I'm not laying the framework down for this properly, because I think I'm just going into this like with a bit too much energy. Everyone has kind of like, certainly in the UK, has grown up with probably a very similar experience regarding like the grade system and exams and things like that, about how not only like important these things are, but how defining they are to your life. The fact that what happens to you at this point essentially determines what you can do in the future forever. And okay, we can talk about the actual things that exist, like how life actually is. But if we're talking about how is it said to you when you're at these ages, how is it given to you, how is it demonstrated? I personally don't think that I was given the perspective of, yeah, you can actually work for a few years and then do this and then do that and then have and find yourself or whatever, because that's not how the system of education works. And that's definitely not how for like, if you're a school or a college, what you are interested in. If you're a school or a college, you're interested in getting good grades because that's important, right? That's important to you in your school. That's important to how you are considered, reviewed, etc., amongst this larger sort of system. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against the fact that there must be some level of oversight over every school to make sure that there aren't schools fucking over kids and literally putting them in situations where they're not going to be taught properly, educated properly, etc. There must be,
as we discussed a few weeks ago with the academy system.
Exactly. Yeah. Like there must, like, we are not against the fact that there must be, that we do care about children's futures. And we have talked about the fact that, hey, society expects a lot from people. And, well, I shouldn't say just a lot from people. It expects far too much from people and pushes people into very specific lanes. And unfortunately, an education system, even in its most benevolent, has to work partly within that framework just to be like, hey, life, like the system we have is shit, but even though the system we have is shit, we have to get you ready. We have to let you know what it's going to be like and or more importantly, we have to get you at least well enough with a curriculum so that you can get a grade that at least pretends that any of this fucking matters, because for the large part, it genuinely doesn't. Once you enter into college era, like the areas of college and stuff like that, you didn't go to, you didn't do A levels, or did you do A levels? I forget. Like,
I did them in the end.
You did them in the end. Okay.
Yeah.
Then you probably will agree with me that A levels, in like as a general rule, are extremely. I'm trying to say significant, but that's not the right word. Like extremely intense. Even compared to uni, uni is even less so than colleges. College is probably the most intense time period for all of this stuff. And I remember, aside from the fact that it is a harder period of time to learn and you have to develop other skills, which, by the way, like if you're someone who actually finds it pretty easy to work within within like a sort of secondary school system, I think that you might struggle at a certain level when it comes to college, just because it's a lot more like necessary independent learning. So it depends on how well, what's your like kind of out of school life versus in school life when it comes to like your relationship to learning and stuff, which is a whole thing in and of itself that we'll probably end up talking about later, if not during like this specific area. And as a result, like college is a really intense and yet a very formative period as far as like academics is concerned. Extremely formative. If you do not perform well, then that immediately affects everything as far as like university is concerned and all sorts. And even beyond that, because I mean, it's not like every job I've ever had has required me to get A levels, but many jobs that people aspire to do will involve some level of actually asking, okay, you know, what are your A levels? Maybe not your GCSEs, but your A levels are still like might be within a certain realm of usefulness or necessity. And certainly, again, if you're choosing to go into an area, a career, or whatever it is, then suddenly like having this, you know, this pressure for this specific, for these specific grades makes a huge difference, because that may seem to affect like the next part onward. I'm gonna like finish this point by saying that because I have a problem with talking about this story. I will just say right now, with that, it's a little like kind of it's almost too close to the chest that I'm almost distancing myself from it in discussion. Like I'm finding it difficult to like state what I like, my true like kind of emotional feelings about this, even though it might be coming across in my tone. That I of the issues I have with the system of education in terms of how it deals with children's actual future and trying to actually find a way for people to get to where they want to be in a way that works for them and without making them feel like, and again, outside of education, this is also a societal issue, of how they can achieve what they want to achieve, right? Because it's very clear, as you stated, that he would probably be able to get to do the thing that he wanted to do. But that's not, and again, this is hilarious when I start thinking about, in a very dark sense, I agree, with when I think about, oh God, what was it like when I did GCSEs? And I'm like, that shit doesn't, I barely, like the idea of that in my head, and so many people will be like, oh, it didn't matter. But the fact that you think it doesn't matter now doesn't mean you didn't think it mattered then, because it absolutely fucking mattered then. It mattered more than anything. Like truly, I can't think, like, again, I struggle to imagine a time where I was not more concerned for everything I was doing. And as a result, I actually, you know, in certain subjects, which in fact, across all subjects, technically, I definitely like began like degrading, like even by the point of, you know, around the point of college even. So, God, I'm just reading some like this article and seeing some of the things represented into it that I'm not going to read out, because it's even like reading it is about like his death and stuff, you know, like
in total, I think the main cause of concern is we've seen this happen before. Actually, there's been multiple cases of this happening, and from my own, if you want to hear us talk about this properly in depth for like a good hour and a half, one of our early episodes, if you can deal with audio being not as good as it is now, we talk about our time through the education system and the current the constant thing that was in our lives is that pressure to be something. You know, we have to be pretty much close to perfect, and there's an expectation that we have to pass these exams. If you don't pass the exams, we're going to fail as human beings. I remember being told, like, well, if you don't pass your GCSEs, you're not going to get any. You'll be working at McDonald's. And that language have always bothered me. It always has. And it's the idea that your life is represented by the things you have written on a piece of paper. Now, I truly think that my life is better because I went back and I did GCSEs, and I did the A levels. Like, I'm able to do my university course now because I did those things. And the caveat to it is that I could do this university course without my A levels, without my GCSEs. But the learning I did through that time helped me, but it's not a being the like it's not the conclusive thing. There's always an outcome in which you can do better and you can excel, and it might not be the right time for you to learn something. It might not be the perfect time for you to pass your maths GCSE. It might not be, but even in the case of this child here, they remarked it, and it was a pass. Like, but they constantly leave you in a state of limbo. They remarked it, and he passed. And it's late. It's far too late now, isn't it? The day after he committed suicide, his mom gets an email that he's only gonna fucking passed. And it's like that, as well as pressures of he had to present something in school as well, and he's afraid of that, and all the other things that teenage boys go through. But we don't ever look to listen to understand what teenage boys go through. We just demonize and we just say, "Oh, you know how it is. Boys are doing this stuff and they're all like this." Da, da, da. It's like we really need to adopt a mosaic approach to learning, as in we have to understand what young people are actually dealing with when it comes to exam stress, because we keep on hearing how bad it is, but the only thing I get back is older people saying, "Well, that's what it is for everyone. It's tough. Deal with it." And it's like, well, look at how fucked up most adults, and look at us, for example, are now due to those exam stresses, due to that societal pressure. Like, it's not, we're not excelling, we're not doing better as a society, we're failing our young people. And once again, special educational needs is not being accounted for, it's not being supported enough. ADHD and autism, help him. We have to help him. And we once again has failed somebody. We have failed a young person, we failed a family, and it is another massive failure for this country's educational system.
Well said.
Is that it? Yeah. Okay, on to the next one. This is all you.
Nah, it's both of us, I mean, but I will open up the floor for it. Keeping on the education sort of track, this is from Science Daily, from the University of Georgia. There is this a study done around the fear of rejection and how it influences how child conform to peers. The actual summary: the fear of rejection, familiar to many children and adults, can significantly impact how kids behave in their peer groups, according to new research. Now, okay, if you just say that in a normal context, like, yes, most people will assume that, the fear of rejection will affect people. However, I think it's just interesting kind of going through some of the things that they describe, because whether or not this study actually says anything new, I think it's interesting to use the study and the summary of the study to effectively explain something that seems to exist, which even I wasn't quite privy to, and me and Alex had a whole conversation about it, and we found it to be an interesting topic about kind of the different categories and experiences around rejection sensitivity, which is the idea of being someone who, if you are in a situation, so you are growing up, you are naturally in a social community, and you are, as a human being, obviously we can, without going into really pedantic discussions about is everyone as social as we're not talking about the vast minority that kind of don't quite work within the social diagrams that we make for humans conceptually, but largely speaking, and vast majority speaking, we are a very social species. And rejection conceptually, when we look at it outside of just a purely I got rejected by someone that I asked out, when we're talking about rejection as in rejection, relationship rejection in general, being rejected from a group, rejected from your age group, rejected from work colleagues, rejected from activity, right? That there are varying that there are kind of two concepts that exist within this rejection sensitivity that this is pointing out, this particular study. and then we'll go into a little bit about what the actual study said. But it refers to two categories: rejection expectancy, which is the cognitive tendency to expect rejection, i.e., it's the belief that you will be rejected. So it's kind of like, you can think of it as a percentage. You can just think of it as a like a kind of spectrum, like kind of feeling of rejection, but it comes from a cognitive place of, I will be rejected. So this is about how you relate to people and your expectation of the fact that you will be rejected from a social group, a norm, etc. And then the other one is more to do with the emotional feeling anticipating rejection. So how you relate to the idea of you potentially being rejected. The two particular ones, because in psychology, to be clear, in psychology they're put in kind of opposite camps, is like anxiety / nervousness and anger. This, a part of this is because they are like kind of like the mad, or actually no, I don't think that quite works, but essentially the like anger and anxiety are considered like to be like chemically very distinct, but have very similar psychological points. So effectively, they're almost like two sides of the same coin, if you want to think of them that way. The idea of like withdrawing versus like, fight or flight, like they kind of like, the half light, like withdrawing or going out and making a ruckus and things like that. What this was pointing out was that is just how significant this seems to be in young people. Effectively, how much like how conforming this is in I believe for the particular study it was 9. I thought it was a particular age group, but I might be wrong. But it was 4th and 5th grade students. There you go. And it was kind of like looking at them and seeing how much their relationship with rejection related to how their status was within groups, and what they sort of thought were, and how they engaged with others and how they fit in, so to speak, and whether they felt they needed to fit in. It's really the main thing to take from this, and I think as our kind of discussion evolved, was in my case, for example, I felt like a really strong feeling about this in terms of how, looking back, obviously this is all looking back because I couldn't have had this concept back then, of how I perceive like rejection at every turn, or how I assume rejection will occur so regularly, right? How it will seem to, how I believe that benign moments, this is associated with rejection sensitivity, that benign moments that actually have no relationship to rejection become associated in my head as rejection. How there was a period of time in primary school, again, it's funny that you mentioned it before, but go back to us talking about our own experiences being in school, and how there was a very specific period of time between like the ages of sort of 8 and 11 for me, where I felt incredibly isolated, and I felt rejected from most groups and other people. And the basis for this, the thing that this study points out, before I go way too deep into this and actually have a proper conversation with Alex on this, because I should give you a good enough grounding, is that those who are anxious about, i.e., that they are considering and considerate that they need to make a change, they need to do stuff, will heavily conform as expected to will try to conform to the to whatever the norm is, although this has obviously many negatives, like it can, like for example, they become less assertive, for example, and they may choose to become choose to kind of like maybe possibly respectfully in a very like healthy sense. It would be like respectfully contain certain certain personal experiences until later, but in many cases can be, if hyper, would end up being like far more than that. Like, okay, they like squash down and they reduce themselves down specifically so as not to fall outside of it. If you're anxious, then you are so fearful that you are going to be that you're going to fall outside of the group that you make a very pointed essentially pointed point towards yourself. You really like define yourself by a sort of categorical imperative that you must be this, you must act a certain way. And then the other thing was that if you believe that you're going to be rejected regardless of what you do, that the two sort of forms is that you either become withdrawn, i.e. that you feel, well, that's sort of like, I'm simplifying the concept or the expression of it, but the feeling of like kind of, well, I'm not a part of anyone else or these people, so I will go and do my own thing completely separate, or become sort of like angry and hostile as a result of the fact that, hey, well, guess what? Like, seemingly it feels right to be sort of, that kind of like feeling of justice or that feeling of unfairness that exists, that like, okay, well, this isn't working for me, and that's not right that it's not working for me in this scenario. And if they're trying to fit in and not get rejected, that's when the anxious person, the person who's particularly rejection sensitive, but is still very anxious or very angry that they are not, like from an emotional perspective and rather than the cognitive, that they are being, that they may be rejected, are then kind of conforming and forcing themselves into these perspectives. Overall, before we now talk about our own personal experiences or extrapolate on this subject, it's really clear that obviously if we can find it is the job of like any sort of like mentor, teacher, carer in many ways to kind of notice these things and potentially like and try to have a form of advice or social adhesion, like, or like a way for them to socially cohese if they find difficulty with it with other people, find ways for them to engage with others where rejection is not on the table, to get them used to the idea that rejection is not the expected outcome, certainly, and perhaps that even it's not something they need to worry about all the time. Like if you're in a situation where generally you do not experience that like rejection regularly,
Yeah.
it can exist, sure. Like obviously we don't get along with everyone, but if you experience it like a decent amount, but not all the time, then clearly you're going to then, and you have like good people around you, and you have like and you find a social group for yourself. I mean, essentially, this is why cliques exist. This is why social groupings exist at all. Then you don't need to have that level of anxiety where you expect that you need to prove that you need to like assert yourself to everyone that they must like you, or that they need to respect you, or whatever, in the way that can naturally evolve from this. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here towards like kind of society as a whole. Yes.
Like,
yeah,
it's
totally.
Very
like
to actually find the baseline, because like I love the idea of exposing kids to things like rejection, because rejections are simple as saying the word no. Like, and what that means could be a lot of things. For example, when I'm coaching football, oh, can we do shooting now? No. Like, that's I since studying this, the idea of the word no to a young person is actually quite alarming, because I realized that a lot of the time, the first time they hear the word no in a really like strong manner is from a teacher or a secondary caregiver. So like a football coach, which is me, a teaching assistant, a teacher, a distant family member. because it's something where it kind of takes you out of the normal comfort zone. So I tell that kid, no, we're not going to do shooting because we're going to learn how to, press in a small-sided game or whatever. And there's a big social impact that happens. Like, I've been told I can't do something, and I've been told that what I want to do isn't right, and it isn't the right way forward. And now I feel invalidated, and now I feel like what I'm asking for isn't being listened to, and it's a whole big thing that can snowball from there. And now, whenever I say no to somebody of a certain age or younger, I always say no and give the reason why we can't.
Yeah.
Just because that does a lot. That does a lot. It's like, oh, he said
100%.
no, and he explained that the reason behind all of this is because he wants to focus on how we can get into the position so we can shoot. And it's like, if you can paint the journey with them, the word no is fine. Like, the word no is great.
It's context and association, right? In that specific like carer position. You don't want to, like, I really, and I've had this a few times because I've ended up looking after lots of kids as I've been growing up. I really did. I was always very specific to be like, hey, no, but, and then there would always be something afterwards, maybe there's an anxiety thing where that comes from, but ultimately, like, I always felt like me not giving some level of like specificity, made it the most vague thing, which, I mean, whether subconsciously or not, was something that I hated as someone who finds it difficult to understand why people choose to, like, when someone says something, I struggle to know exactly what they mean by it. And it's like, yeah, no, I would like to be very clear on what the fuck is going on. Why is it that you've told me to sit on the bench? Why is it that you've told me to stay after class? Why is it that you've, I want a real, I want there to be a clear defining, essentially like feedback. I mean, if nothing else, like that's like an obvious way of taking rejection and sort of echoing the like rejection. Again, rejection in and of itself, as we've already described, is not a bad thing in and of itself, because rejection is a natural experience of life. And when I say it's a natural experience of life, I mean it's not something we should expect to go away, because why should we expect people? Should we expect people to just get along with each other completely fine all the time? No, that would be ridiculous. We can create the best conditions for that, but it doesn't mean that we can just like force each other to just like each other and get along, right? Like, that's just not how it is. You can just make the best scenario for people to get along. And that's it's a whole difficult process anyway. But the point is, sorry, you take off.
I guess like this is where, like, we spoke about this before we started recording, like the idea of the self, right? And the idea of like the self and self concept. And it's like, you have, I don't want to go into full detail again because we'll be here for like another 6 hours, but like the idea is that we have like a tapestry of who we are. And it's ideas and feelings about what we believe we can be and what we want to be, what we feel like we are, and what we want other people to look at us as. And when it comes to like things like rejection, and the study is like the young people the kids who have a fear of rejection fall into line because, obviously, they don't want to be seen as an outlier, be othered. However, the kids who expect rejection already feel like an outsider. They already feel like they've been othered. So they not really play into it, but they don't really engage with it in the same way. So they go, do you know what? It doesn't matter. I'm on the fringe anyway. I'm going to stay here. And it's kind of in the most non-assertive way, a very assertive action from both types of young people here, where it's like, I'm committing to something to protect my idea of what I am represented as, what I want to be represented as. And it's like, you realize something. One, kids are fucking stupid, but also adults are equally as stupid. And there's not much we can really do in terms of like, how can we fix this? Well, there's no way to fix it. This is like part of the natural part of life, really, where it's like we can't, unless we are all mind readers, we won't really be able to know what people are feeling and what people feel like they should be feeling, and that's part of the issue with all this stuff as well. Is rejection can come from different experiences as well. Like if you come from a background where your family hug a lot and say "I love you" every single 5 seconds, but then you go to a place like school and you go to hug one of your friends and they go, "What the fuck you doing, bro?" Like, that's a rejection, but you don't expect that. A teacher can't look at that, or a mentor can look at it and go, "Ooh, I should have seen that coming." No, because we don't know how the cultures and what cultures like where how a culture shaped somebody's idea of rejection. However, you might have somebody who, like my family, we never say "I love you" or anything like that. We don't hug or anything like that. So if somebody doesn't want to hug me, I don't feel a certain way straight away. I don't feel that rejection from it. And personally, it's really weird. Like, I'm going to stick on the notion of hugs to end what I'm saying here. One of my favorite things to see and to be a part of is when, like, everyone's hugging each other goodbye and someone goes, "Sorry, I don't do hugs." That means a lot to me. Because one, it means that you've put a boundary in place. Two, that means that your idea of yourself is that you're somebody who doesn't like that as a form of affection. And that's a big stepping stone that we don't always make. The amount of people who I see going for hugs are people who they absolutely detest, but they don't want to be a rejecter and they don't want to feel like they are part of something that is like a rejection process for somebody else is huge. And it's like, of all the things that we deal with as human beings, and as I said before, the tapestry of self and the characteristics that make up who we are, or what we want to be seen as, it's really interesting how our brain doesn't want to be othered or has the expectation of being othered, so we adjust ourselves accordingly.
Yeah. To your point quickly about the hugging thing, just because I think it's interesting, like because a lot of this is about it's social, right? Like the self in relation to the social scenario of how do you relate to other people, right? This is kind of I don't as much as like anyone could talk about the social or the self, like there is I don't believe anyway that there is a distinct like this is the self, this is the social, just like there isn't a this is the nurture, this is the nature. Like there is a strong overlap that prevents either one. Being social and being a single person are inextricably linked, right? There is no kind of like way in which you can just be one or the other, in my mind. As I say all of this, so for the person, for example, who says like, this is not something that I don't want to have this hug, I don't want to engage with this. That to me, like, represents more than just a case of like understanding the self. There's also an understanding of how to engage with kind of the social paradigm. Like you're saying, okay, I don't need this thing and I do not want this thing in order to understand this. I grew up in a very in the opposite vein. I am a very like, and I shouldn't say just I grew up, rather I am a very, I should say, physically loving person. Like to me, like the reason I hug you and I hug Kessis and all of that is because for me it's very important, right? Even if it isn't for everyone. My brother is not quite so much as I am, for example. In fact, nowhere near as much as I am, I think, like deep down. And that's perfectly fine. But I will be like the heavy hugger on most sides, if that makes sense. Even if I'm the lightest one out of everyone around me. And as a result, when I eventually went into into primary school, especially, I guess because this was the founding of this, because I think in nursery, children kind of being physical with one another is like not particularly unusual. But then when I went into primary school, it became, because you and I grew up in places where there's quite a lot of homophobia, for example, and this like very like astute concept of masculinity that was very like, that had this, that very much saw that like kind of male to male like physical intimacy in general as being like as being very like effeminate. That as a result, that suddenly has changed me. That meant that me just kind of like interacting playfully or wanting to like kind of like hug someone. Like I can't even remember a time when I really hugged someone in primary school. Like I'm
Yeah.
sure it happened when I was really young, like reception or something. But I can't really remember doing it at any point after that, despite the fact that I absolutely would have done it in nursery, that I would have done it for
Yeah.
all of my
Yeah.
life outside of that. And nowadays, I do it with like people that I know are aware of it, but in the back of my head, I'm like, oh yeah, I can't. I have to almost wait for someone to do it in many, like it's not something I engage with as regularly as might feel the self I would like to. And it's kind of one of those weird things where it's like I'm almost like to imagine the opposite example of what you've described of this individual. I would have to be like, can I hug you? Like, like that's like,
Yeah.
which sometimes happens. And it's something that happens probably when, we have like a pre-drinks or a nights out or something where I'm like, I'm way more likely to just be like, my inhibitions are out of the way. So I'm more likely to ask, when my anxiety is completely removed. But the only reason I even have a concept of anxiety around it is pretty heavily based on the fact that I grew up in an area where it was so hostile to, like, there was a hostility towards that kind of behavior, right? And the fact, as you described, like this could be like across different cultures. I was even thinking during our conversation prior to the podcast, like even thinking of like a difference between a city and the countryside. Like there's so many ways in which this can be like where like differences and then probed more. Like I know people from up north, but I also know people from up north in different areas, and they all have like kind of slightly different relationships to one another and how they engage with one another on varying different levels, where I'm like, yeah, there really isn't like there is in no way like some actual real how you're meant to be. Like there's no guidebook. And the fact that you think that your like nation, local area, parents, even like your local culture, to be honest, has any actual definition of how you should be, how like you should feel in any particular case is technically wrong. Like, like there is no like actual code book for it, but the reality is that you're going to learn a code as you grow up, regardless, which you have no control over. So, and there is going to be like a part of you that wants to do things, and then a social thing that tells you how to be. There may be some things where you align, some things where you don't align. So overall, we're all in this like these kind of like, I can't even think of like what like the shape of this would look like, but like these like different like shapes of personality and interaction associated with just the idea right down at the beginning of everything. I don't want to be outside of the social group. And all right, there's a beep outside. I don't want to be outside the social group. And the fact that that is what it comes down to so primarily, and it's rejection being the like primary word we would use to describe that concept, is just, I think, a very like whether I'm asking anyone to like take a moment to think about themselves and how they relate to all of what we've just said or not, or if you're just someone who's like, hey, I'm cool, but I should recognize that other people might have their own things that they feel, and I should be sensitive to that. However you want to kind of relate to this, but I think this is a true social program, I guess, if you know what I mean. Like to understand that we have all grown up in a world which is not fair, which is not caring for how we are as human beings in relation to one another, and we have been given a history each and every one of us in every area with so many different things going on, telling us how we have to be, should be, want to be, could be, and it all manifests in all of these different ways, and we can't really like and we can't like settle into a this is how we should be in general, because we shouldn't. We should be like malleable to one another and be able to kind of recognize that. And also, obviously, as the study sort of points out, be able to kind of have a system which, you know, recognize it, you know, makes a point about looking into this in young people at an early age and kind of recognizing what is and isn't, kind of going beyond the boundary, not just of social, but more so of like kind of, you know, what isn't like a personally fine thing to feel and be interested in doing, and not feel the like rejection of, you know, by virtue of just kind of like having discussions with young people about, and kind of, you know, again, finding that sort of inclusivity, I guess, and not having people feel like, oh, because I have done this and this is how I feel it should be, that I'm going to look at everyone else who is doing well for themselves and think to myself that they are bad just because they have been able to do all of the things that they've been able to do without like crushing their own dreams like I have. You know, like that kind of concept at the end of the day. It's a very, I kind of like went over this a little bit before with the podcast. We shouldn't reference before the podcast so much as this, but we did have a long conversation about it. And just the idea of like, you know, the idea of like truly hating others around you for being able to do what you feel like you couldn't do because of the feeling of rejection that you have is so tragic. Like it's so personally tragic to everyone, because everyone has some concept of that. Probably there's very few people, I think, in the world who are just so like I am me that they can just avoid that, you know, like get away with that. And I think it's most clear people do not.
We can discuss this for a good amount of time. But just to like wrap, I think that we could talk about this forever, but also just again how this also links to the first story with young Alex Henshaw who sadly took his own life, and how the idea of rejection and what it does to us as a society as well, especially when it's not, I don't want to use the word aftercare, but when there's no care with how we reject each other and what rejects who, if that makes sense. Like an institution rejecting somebody is ridiculously different to a person rejecting somebody. So like these are things that I think, again, more research needs to be done. And I am a big fan of committing research into childhood and youth studies, because you get less cases where, like, as we've discussed, both myself and Joe and I have dealt with stress linking to things like rejection in school settings. And we don't want that to be a common occurrence. The reality is it is, but we don't want that. And it's always good to see research like this being done. And let's see what action can be taken and what we can do, what we can implement. What policies can we change? What policies can we create from this? The logical answer is none. It might just be a change in our philosophy and ideology and how we teach, how we communicate to young people. But again, it's still fun and interesting to look at.
At the very least, what kind of role models can we be as adults to young people? Even in the
drugs, kids.
even in the smallest you know, versions of this, you know.
If you get told to get in a car, get in the car.
That really reminds me of Outnumbered with Stranger Danger that I was watching recently. It was very funny.
Yeah, like, but that's it. That's that really. It is time for the journal. Yeah, it's time for the journal. We're going to talk about our lives and all that stuff. I'm going to go first, and I'm going to be very, very brief with all of this. Virtual reality is really fun. I've got a Meta Quest 3S headset, and I was just like, hey, I'm gonna have fun with this. I'm gonna enjoy myself. I'm gonna really try and immerse myself into this whole world of virtual reality, and I've been having a blast. I've been playing a game called Thrill of the Fight. It is a boxing game, and it is, I would equate it to a round of light sparring. So just how much energy I've expended. The game's not perfect, but I found a lot of joy in just like popping off combos, and the game tracks it. The hit detection's okay, that could be improved. And it's like, do you know what? I have been having a decent time. I've also been using it as a way to actually improve on Muay Thai as well. Like, I noticed that when I'm throwing a combination, my right hand drops a little bit lower every single time I throw a combination. I noticed that in like real life sparring. So then picking up on that in front of the fight is a good way to implement the changes to that, you know, things like that. And I've been playing Beat Saber, and I love Beat Saber. I think it's a great game. However, the music collection is lacking, and I'm not paying like $5.99 for a pack of songs when I only want to listen to or play 2 of them. So the only thing I've bought from there is Not Like Us by Kendrick Lamar, and then I modded the game. I modded the game, and I got Last Dell in it. I got Overkill, one of my favorite songs ever. I love Men at Work, so Men at Work, I've got all of their songs in it. I've got some killer songs on it as well. I've got Bring Me to Life by Evanescence, and I've been playing through that at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's been an absolute blast. Can I recommend a VR headset to people? Only if you can see it as a worthwhile investment, and you can guarantee that you will like spend at least 3 or 4 hours a week on it, because it is a hefty amount of money, you know? It's a lot. I think it cost me $299 in total, and I was just like, I have to, the minute I don't pay this, the minute I don't play this, I have to sell it. Like straight away. I have to recoup costs in it straight away. And no, I can see myself using it and even upgrading it when the upgrade to it comes out eventually, which hopefully be like in a couple of years from now. I like to think that this can last for at least 1.5 or 2 years. Fucking hell. But yeah, that's that, man. That's my journal.
Just so you know, Ryan, I did press the Let's Go button when he said it, so no worries. I was actually going to ask about the VR stuff. Do you think that there is a world in which VR could ever be used for Muay Thai sparring stuff? It's just like, as you were describing it, I was like, oh, I wonder if that actually is a concept.
100%. So like, there's a thing called Be Your Best, which is like a football-based thing, and it really improves like your scanning on a football pitch, like looking around your head, like, oh, I could pass to this player here, and things like that, because you look around the whole room. It's a 360 device, effectively. So with Muay Thai, it will need things like, it will take a whole hardware improvement. So I have to be able to track your knees and your arms. That being said, if it could track my hands perfectly fine, right? So it should be able to track an elbow. And just judging by your hand placement, if you lean your hand back, then that should probably be enough to signify that your elbow's going forward. So yeah, it definitely can be. I think it's going to take another 3 or 4 years till we get something commercial out for Muay Thai. But I would love it. I would absolutely love it. I just want a Muay Thai game, honestly. And I've seen a few like clips of people making Muay Thai games, but it's very, very, very like, we're talking pre-alpha with these games, so nowhere near release. But I'd love to have like a one championship Muay Thai game, but like with most of these things, the idea is great, the execution's often lacking. But I would love it if when that game comes out, I am in the game. Like, I would love to be a character in the game. Like, fuck it. Like, if we have to use like
future sponsorship,
I just want to be. Like, I want to be in the game as a fighter. Like, I want to be. Give me a one championship as a fighter. You have like Taiwan Chai being a 5-star, Reagan Urso being a 5-star. There's me being a 1.5 star. you know, 47 speed out of 99. Like,
can I be in there as a 0.1 star? That'd be fun.
A point.
If I haven't improved at that point.
Yeah, like we need to get you back into training. But
can I be like Glassjaw Joe from like from fucking Little Mac.
That punch
Yeah,
out,
yeah.
yeah.
Punch out.
Jesus
Yeah.
Christ.
Oh my god, that'd be so sick. I could be the Joe in the game. Amazing.
Yeah. Like
Awesome.
it'd be great. I love to see like a advancement on that one. But yeah, that's it really.
Okay, so I have on the docket. I've got the word attachments here. So, I this isn't. I hope this isn't like too philosophical or anything like that. But I had two ideas in my head. I put the other one aside and just I want to focus on attachments a little bit. I've been doing some sort of meditations on how I have been, both how I felt during like the more like the sort of difficult era recently. I call it the March era. That's gonna be nice. Like that's a easy way of describing it. The March era, and also like what I think will be helpful for improvement going forward. And this was also like a sort of philosophy that I've kind of thought about before in relationship to Buddhism and so on, but we'll get to it anyway. So, so sorry. I hope this isn't too philosophical. The main, not that I haven't like gone off on one anyway about that's very philosophical or attempting to be. So I think this started with me thinking this, by the way, is obviously like, you know, what I've been thinking about for the last like kind of week and a half, 2 weeks, about how do I, about the nature of kind of experience and engaging with the world. And also, I was also thinking about, in kind of very similar to the many of the subjects we've been talking about today, about like, if I had like a kid or if I was looking after someone, what would I want them to, you know, what would I want to teach them? Like, and I was going back and forth about this and thinking about kind of like how I myself have, like, what have I been doing over the entirety of my life? What about it do I think is extremely lacking? Or, you know, do I think I've just been doing wrong things, or do I just think I've been doing a lot of things in a like a bit too much effectively? I mean, obviously I talked about addiction and so on, but that's not so much like me doing it too much as it is just me having a problem, right? Like you can do something too much while not having like a relationship problem with it. But sure, I do it too much, and that means, you know, I have a problem with it. But I think it was within that thinking, and I was thinking about YouTube a lot, where I was like, a lot of what YouTube has done is it's acted as this kind of like space in which I can sort of phantomly exist and phantomly, you know, we talked about parasocial before, like phantomly attached to things that I genuinely enjoy about life itself. A lot of the people that I tended to engage with are people who are people I like the you know, the personality of, the presentation of, and don't get me wrong, outside of myself, that's a very common attitude across people who just engage with social media or in many different ways. It's, you know, oh, I like this person, and that's kind of a lot of the essential basis for all of this. But I think but what kind of like became interesting to me was the comparison between this kind of ephemeral attachment, i.e. this sort of like unattachment from, like, you know, I think I've talked before about how I'm quite minimalistic and so on. And very recently I talked, or last episode, I talked about like the value of money, which seems sort of like outside of that kind of minimalism, like being unattached from material things kind of concept. But actually I've begun to realize that I think, am I going to reference Vinland Saga? That should be a button for you as well. But I remember someone actually did a video on Vinland Saga where they talked about defying the or denying the, or whatever, but going against the idea of being unattached from the world as a core concept. As I was like thinking about all of this, there's this kind of representation which I think is, or not representation. I think there's this like this thought and philosophy and theology and all of that relating to the idea of being kind of unattached from the world to reach a kind of like holier station. It doesn't have to be holy as such. It could just be like a station that is more kind of pure, a station that's more a personal state that is, because you're less concerned with like trivial things, you care about things that are important. Now the question is that what is important? And at what point does something become sort of unattached from reality versus attached to reality? Like, is the success of people around you, is the love of another person, like that's very regularly described as technically an attachment to the earth, or like an attachment to reality, or attachment to, kind of material things, even like, kind of a sexual nature, or of like a physical nature. That's obviously very like material. And I was really thinking over this a lot. And I kind of fall alongside what I think that person, obviously I can't reference them because this is a video I watched so long ago, was describing a Vinland Saga, but also things like, especially when I think more about how I've engaged with ephemeral concepts by virtue of engaging with social media so much and not engaging with the reality around me and engaging with like people, that I feel like I engage with ephemeral things, and the ephemeral things I engage in, as material as they might be in terms of like the extended notion of them, represents a kind of like a disattachment from reality that I am very against. And then on the flip side, there's a kind of other kind of disattachment, or like unattachment. Again, I don't quite know the right word to use, relating to not being like tethered to earthly things, which I can totally see like a lot of the concepts of why. But I genuinely think suffers a lot in many ways, in being able to establish both a sense of like true happiness for oneself, but also a true understanding of the world, like being too unattached, even in a kind of like in a sense towards divinity, in a sense towards spirituality, in a sense towards like higher purpose, higher being, higher concepts, can actually completely remove you from what makes, being a person important in the first place, like both existence and caring for other people. You know what I mean? Like there's a version of this which is like, like, oh, compassion of the highest order. This is very much a thing in like Shinran idea, relating to like the highest version of compassion within Buddhism and other sorts of things like that. And I love where that's going, and I think that's like I think that I'm always pulled towards that because it's very idealistic, and I'm just an idealistic individual. But I very much recognize, and I think I'm beginning to recognize it more now, that the more that I have lived a life of fantasy and idealism almost in its entirety because of the way that I've engaged with the world. And I need to see how that kind of that is actually not attachment in the way that I would describe being like finding reasons to live in the physical world, because that stuff, a lot of what I've engaged with has actually been, attaching myself to kind of like ephemeral, immaterial concepts that are actually not physical, not reality, not engaging with the world around us. Like being on social media, and I think outside of social media, if we're just talking about humanity as a whole, engaging with like kind of purely idealistic ideas has a way of pulling you out of what is reality. Like any idealistic concept must be very grounded in order for it to keep you in the space of reality. It's very difficult. And as a person, to idealize in one respect, like of a future that you hope for, yet not give up on the grounded ideas like compassion for those that you think are entirely opposed to that idea, is a very difficult line to walk along. A difficult tightrope, a very slim tightrope to walk along. Yet somehow I think it is almost it is a very important concept of the idea of being of like finding hope effectively, of finding a kind of not an escape from reality, although next episode I'll talk a little bit about escaping, but like a form of reality which is like what you want reality to be and reality as it is. Like we can't like there like the necessity for both of those to exist in one's mind and not for either one to exist on its own without the other, I think is somewhere where I'm starting to realize. So I'm coming from the perspective of what I want to exist and the ephemeral fantasy that I've lived for a long time in terms of my daily life, my media consumption, my engagement with the world. The fact that I'm so scared of I have been so scared of the world, and I have been so finding it so difficult to connect, and being like, okay, well, yeah, I'm clearly finding it difficult to connect, so I should probably try connecting and forget about all the things that allow me to escape that point. Like, you know, anything that is preventing me from connecting, I need to ignore for a period of time, at the very least, to give myself the opportunity to connect and see what happens. I mean, even if we're going to go like really specific into a subject for a second, even something like the idea of like being attractive to people as a concept, from an idealistic, ephemeral concept, I have lived a life and where I have regularly thought to myself that I am incapable of being found attractive, that I'm a person who's incapable of being loved in that kind of way or being understood in that kind of way. And it comes from both like a vain perspective, which is a seemingly like, you know, physical earthly thing, this like very like ephemeral, like highly you know, idealistic concept of like the human body, but it's also at the same time like along the side of me thinking that, well, you know, I that I should be kind of loved in this like very different way, like in this non like physical way. Like they like the result of living both of those experiences, one which is quite, it's probably like healthier, the idea of like, you know, that love is, you know, that love is not conditional on these sorts of things, and then having this like very conditional form of love, and then putting and trying to make those meld together without any like kind of recognition that actually people just kind of like what they want. Like, you know, if we actually get down to the attachment process and say like, hey, some people are attached to certain things and then that's just kind of how it is, and it's not a really big issue, you know. Like, and as it turns out, I will look at some people and in this like horrible idealistic way be like, how the fuck are they together? You know, and in, you know, in the horrible way that I can do that sometimes, and I'm like, oh shit, that's my own like problems that I have like put out towards them. And it's like, but of course the reality is that one, that matters way less than you think it does, because it just does matter way less than you think it does. And secondly, because that just genuinely isn't the only thing in reality that makes people care for one another. It's that like hyper fixated form of any sort of like ephemeral conceptual idea that creates these, you know, branches that are again removed from actually being attached to the world as it is. So now, and this is going to be really stupid what I'm about to say, as I'm going to like finish this up. Where I first began this concept from, where I first began to think about this, like truly and utterly, was me observing the dog that I live with. Because
Woof.
because of the way that I realize the dog engages with me, like on a like the way, like I don't, you know, I'm not pretending like any like, because I have a personal opinion about like, you know, consciousness and all of that, whatever. Everyone has their own idea about how like animals understand things or whatever. I'm not going to go into it. We can all have a discussion about it one day. I'd love to. That'd be really fun. But, you know, in my mind, like the way the dog understands who I am or anyone else around it is by a pure like kind of, you know, engagement with like physical notions. I don't imagine it understands me in like some kind of like, you know, in some other like conceptual way that I can conceive of things, because I don't think it's necessarily capable of conceiving of like, you know, me as like a kind of larger concept beyond what it associates with me or whatever. But the point is that like during its, you know, there was one day where we were just around each other, and I realized that even if I don't do entirely what it wants me to do, it would like if I was just around. And then I remember like being upstairs. I remember being on my bed, being like all sleepy. No one was downstairs with him. There wasn't like too many people in the house that night. And he comes up. My bedroom door is open. He comes into the bedroom, and he comes over, sniffs he sniffs over towards where I am for like barely a second, and then lies down and sits on the floor of my bedroom and just faces out the door, just like watching out the door for me. And there was nothing that he needed beyond that. He required nothing. All he wanted to do was just be in the physical space of me. And I thought about what that would be like from my perspective, just being like, hey, I just want to be around you. And like, you know, from a purely human standpoint, like, I just want to be around Alex. I just want to hang out with you. I just want to hang out in a Discord with you. I just want to hang out in a park with you. I just want to talk to you. I just want to, you know, and it began to make me realize how stupid it is that I don't find some value or push towards those attachments that I genuinely care about in life. That like, why am I choosing to, again, maybe anxiety is a huge part of this. Why is it that I'm choosing to undermine what could possibly be the entire reason that I'm like the things that make me happy ultimately? Maybe you heard the dog there. That entirely make me happy. On the basis of like some like, you know, of these other things that are very ephemeral and take me out of reality, because obviously that's a big part of my experience with YouTube, is that it takes me out of reality in an escapist way, which again many people experience, and for many people that's perfectly healthy, but for me it's not. And I as a result, I end up living a life where I'm truly not in touch with reality whatsoever, and I'm wondering to myself why it is that I don't feel connected to people. Why is that I don't even feel connected to my friends on occasion? Why is that I struggle to remember that people exist, or that, you know, or that or that I or that there is a sort of lack of meaning or like purposefulness, because I love being around people, and I love being around. I love attaching myself to the physical world. One of the reasons I love walks is because I walk around and I engage with the world as it is. I go around. I understand my geography, my topography. I know that if I walk out of here, I can go wherever I want and still find my way home like a pigeon. And I can, you know, make my way, and I can feel like, you know, at some like basic level connected to the city, in the way that you can feel connected to the city of London or New York or like any place in the world that makes you feel like it's your home, because you have a relationship with it that is just purely, I understand reality as it is. So there you go. Like nothing more to it than that. But somehow just the experience of the dog started to make me kind of conceive of what I am missing out in many ways by attaching or disattaching, if you will, so much in one or both directions away from physical reality. There's a whole load of things I could talk about with the philosophy of this, which I'm not going to, by the way, about like how I genuinely feel about the whole concept of like unattaching oneself and so on, and what I think is actually the true path towards like divinity and etc. But that's a whole nother day. I'd love to talk to people about that at some point, but probably not for this. Not for this podcast, or not for a while anyway. Maybe on a dry day, we'll come back to it. But
No, it was
but
actually pretty good.
yeah, but genuinely, attachments, I think, is like a solid foundation that I'm working with right now. That I haven't like fully like established every part of it, but the more I attach to, like, you know, you, like my relationships in general, right, outside of just you, but like my relationships, my 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 attachment to like who, like my body, attachment to uh like the desire for, like, you know, a better world in these different ways, and so on. The more I actually attach to them, rather than just like some conceptual idea of them, the more I begin to realize that I have sort of missed like 90% of what the thing that I'm actually interested in having an attachment to is, because I've largely been living an unattached or disattached life up to this point. And I think that's what maybe next week I'll talk about escapism a bit more in that respect, because I think that's a large part of the narrative anyway.
Yeah,
This is why I wasn't going to do attachments and escapism this episode, because I realized I was going to go way too long about it.
yeah, like funny enough, I spoke about like the self and self concept earlier on the episode, but it's actually very much it is very necessary, like, to recap on it now, and about how we look at ourselves. Like, I think in general, a lot of things to do with child psychology and child and youth studies, especially, which is pretty much what I'm studying, is really relevant to navigating social situations as well, because these are things that I don't really look at and study as adults and look at, oh, adults dealing with this thing here. I look at it and go, I've known you, Joe, since, you know, you were like 12, 13-ish. Like, and it's like, oh, imagine if, like, we understood these concepts back then. Like, oh, imagine if, like, the people around us were more aware of different things, like, be it our neurodivergent conditions, be it our unique viewpoints on things. Imagine if the world was like more accessible and in a social way. And then I also think that I'm kind of happy things have worked out this way, that we go through these journeys. We go through these moments where we're not really sure what we're going to head to, or we have an idea of what we want to be viewed upon, as what we want to be viewed as, or we have this idea of what we want to be viewed. Sorry, I'll say this all again. We have an idea of what we want to be viewed as by other people and how we want to view ourselves. And it's kind of annoying, because to start one journey, you can't really have 4 journeys going on at the same time. So if you want to improve your image, which is how you're viewed by other people, you have to put work into that. But if you want to improve your self-image, that might require a completely different journey. And it's like, how do you balance both of these things? As well as the other journey you have, which is building strong relationships to people. And then another journey, which is building a strong relationship with yourself. Like things like self-esteem and things like that. And it's like, the idea of life being one big journey, yeah, it's cool, it's valid, I get it. But life is like hundreds of tiny little journeys. And they're all going at different speeds. And it's so variable, human to human. Like, it's kind of crazy when you meet somebody and you think, oh, damn, they really do be like me. And you realize how unique life, different perspectives of lives could be, but also how different it is as well. Like, I know people who are very similar to me, but there's massive differences in how we view the world. And it's like, it kind of makes me very, very conscious about the world that we're living in. And also the idea of, like, all it takes is a concatenation of events, and we view each other differently. We view the world differently. We view our environment differently. And it's just like, I don't know, man. I remember being 16 all the way up until the age of 25, 26, and being like, I don't think I'm going to live till 30. And now I'm already thinking about things like, oh man, when I'm 37, I'm going to be winding down my Muay Thai career. And it's like, oh God. Like,
Too much.
Yeah, like, and now I'm thinking about like, like how many poetry albums would I have released by the time I'm 40? And the answer to that is 3. like, no, like in my head I've released like 17, but in reality it's probably gonna be 3. I'll
I
touch
think
base
it's
on you
going to
guys when
be.
I'm nearly 40.
I think it's going to be exponential. Like, I think it's going to exponentially increase. Like, as you get older, you just become like this fucking spitter, like just constantly.
Yeah,
He's going to write one every single day.
yeah. Hey guys, remember how I released an album yesterday? Well, suck my dick. Here's one today.
And it's got more than the last one.
Yeah. Oh, you thought that 45 poems in one album wasn't enough? Here's 49. Like, these are the things that yeah, life is great. It's
It
time
is genuinely.
for choo choo recommendation station. Who's first? It's me.
You are.
Me.
Yeah.
For that. Some dare call it a conspiracy. I feel like I might have recommended this show before, but if I have, fine. If I haven't, good, because I'm adding on a little bit more to it anyway. It's a podcast by 2 former conspiracy theorists. So they were in the trenches of believing things like 9/11 being an inside job and, chemtrails and all that stuff. They both found grounding and realized that their lifestyle being conspiracy theorists is, 1, exhausting, but 2, like, they've debunked multiple conspiracy theories and now they explore conspiracy theories and they have on cool guests, be it comedians, be it other former conspiracy theorists, and they dissect different particular events. I'll recommend, really dark randomly here, but their series on the Manchester bombing, fucking incredible. As they break down the conspiracy theorists around the conspiracy theories and the theorists surrounding it and how insane the idea that this was like a staged event by the UK government is wild. They have a series called Twats, The World According to Some, but, it's called Twats, which Neil Sanders effectively breaks down what's been happening in like the last week or so in the world, be it things to do with Trump, be it things to do with like the UK government, and various conspiracy theory style things as well. And also the reactions from like the conspiracy theorists. So things like discussing the tariffs that Trump has recently put in and discussing like the illegal deportations in America and how reviewing and comparing, contrasting the fact that guys like Alex Jones was like dead against this stuff 20, 15 years ago, saying that this is the Democrats are doing this, and now he's all for it because it's Donald Trump doing it, and things like that. It really helps highlight the hypocritical nature of people, But yeah, some they're calling conspiracy and stuff.
We're definitely not. We definitely don't have an idea of the kinds of people that we're thinking about when you say that.
The lizard people, because they turn the freaking frogs gay.
They're both UK people, right? They're both British, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just remembering back to the episode I listened to.
That would be an incredible collaboration of a podcast. Silly whales, and some dare call it conspiracy. Some dare call it a whale.
Some dare call it a whale. Some dare call it silly. Yeah. So for my recommendation, I actually have 2, even though there's only 1 down because
You lied.
I didn't lie. I just came up with another one. I couldn't think of something, so I initially put down acid jazz. Effectively, I've been listening to a genre called acid jazz. I think there's also like jazz hip hop. It's also pretty fun. Basically, I like jazz, and I also like acid dash something, because acid dash something is like kind of like a bit sort of psychedelic / a bit trippy, like sounds and music, but without necessarily being synthy. Because I find that like I'm not as big a fan of like 80s synth as a lot of other people are, and I don't hate it. I'm just like not. It doesn't like sort of tickle the the top of my spine kind of thing in the way that like some of the like sounds and music does. But acid jazz, I think, has like an interesting sort of realm, because and acid and jazz hip hop and acid hip hop. They all as a trifecta like have like a large area which they do some cool stuff. So I just wanted to sort of recommend that genre. And also, like, so many people hate jazz for some reason, and fuck off. But also, listen to more jazz, and you'll probably realize that there's just some jazz you don't like, because there's some jazz I don't like. It's fair. The second thing I wanted to talk about again was I've referenced them before. I think I recommended them before, in fact. But Dropout. I've just sort of been reminded again and again just how good the platform is for content. They are very much also, if you're looking for, if you care about like how much, you know, comedians and improv people and actors are paid in this world, then like Dropout is a really good subscription. Dropout is also an entire like it's an organization that has literally said like by the way, every single one of our users that uses this was in the wake of I think Netflix or Amazon Prime or something like that, saying like putting in all of these efforts to prevent like password sharing and like account sharing, and they were like, yeah, everyone can share their accounts, just share your accounts as much as you want, both because it's ridiculous to try and like stop it, but secondly because it's, you know, I imagine from a moral and ethical perspective, I imagine that they do engage in it themselves, and they're like, yeah, well, whatever, like you know, you can do it as much as you want. I know that I already share my account and password with a friend of mine already. And it's such a fun show. There's more stuff coming out all the time. D&D is a big thing that I listen to and watch, which is what I've been using recently as my like as my way of engaging with like a sort of social media and not social media, sorry, but engaging with like a media that I can that I have a little bit more kind of control over as I'm like engaging with it, because it's long form content. I don't feel as pulled in to just like skip like from one thing to another, or become too distracted and feel like, oh, I've got to go on to something else. So that's been a big thing for me. And again, there's so many good stories, there's so many good narratives, there's so many good themes and ideas, and just a shout out to Brendan Lee Mulligan being a really, really cool DM and a cool guy in general. I mean, Brendan Lee Mulligan. I think he was on the Downside podcast, I think, with Gianmarco Ceresi, that New York comedian, Italian Jewish comedian, that I've seen a few times on YouTube in the past and quite liked his stuff. So he actually did have an episode on there as well. And yeah, I just want it to succeed and continue to do well. I think it's already doing fine, but I couldn't imagine not recommending it more, to be honest. I would recommend it every week, really, except it would just be boring. So since I don't actually have much beyond just talking about a genre of music, I thought I'd recommend it this week as well.
Fair enough, man. And
that's me.
with that all being said, we're going to take 2 steps to the rear and get out of here. We're in the wind. See ya.
Attach yourself to us.